Morning, everybody. How you doing today? So, for as long as I can remember, I have loved playing the game of basketball. It's been a sport that's been a constant part of my life for decades. And I still play in a regular casual league. But as I have gotten older, much older, and the league has stayed young, I've seen things change, and I've seen how I've had to adapt in order to stay competitive, or at least that last little squeak grain of competitiveness to try to keep up. And I thought that was a really interesting parallel as I sit here extremely sore from playing in the league last night. Because I see this with security teams all the time. No, not that they're out playing basketball, though that would be great. Physical fitness is really important, especially for jobs that are high stress like cybersecurity. But what I see the parallel is that people make decisions and a way of approaching a problem, and they don't necessarily revisit that as the landscape changes around them. So back to my personal example, the way I played the game when I was the age of most of the league is completely different from how I have to play the game now that I'm older, slower, fatter, out of shape, and just generally, the old guy on the court. The game has to change for me. Otherwise, I just would not be able to keep up even remotely. And that's very true in cybersecurity. We see that all the time where people will make a decision and they kind of consider it done. But the landscape of technology, the landscape of cybersecurity, of the threats we face, of the vulnerabilities we're trying to address, that's changing absolutely constantly. Did a calculation a few months ago for a talk, and I think it ended up being we see a new piece of malware every 0.3 seconds. That is an insanely rapid rate of change. As a security professional, the worst thing you can do, and this is unfortunately something that I see absolutely all the time with security teams, is essentially consider a decision made and done and then not revisit it constantly. Now, I'm not saying you should question yourself non-stop, but when you set down a policy or when you set down a way of doing something within a team, you say, okay, this is how we have to harden our images, especially moving into the cloud, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to lock down the operating system. But then new features come out in your cloud provider. And you go, well, wait a minute. Does that change the risk assessment? Does that change how we can meet our security goals? What even were our security goals? And that's really the biggest challenge, is that when people make a decision, they very rarely record why they made that decision and the constraints under which they made that decision, right? So you're working on the information you have at hand. You're trying to make the best decision you can based on A, B, C, D, and all the things that you know about, but you don't record that information. You just record that final decision. And I get it. It's easier to do. You just say, okay, this is what we feel. Everybody's password must be 8 characters or longer with, mixed case, blah, 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 all the old password guidance. But nobody knew why. Nobody actually had recorded why you're doing that. Why was our password guidance for years that way? Even though when you look at it, and we know now with the updated NIST guidelines that was incorrect guidance. But if we had recorded the reasons why you had made that decision, and as a security team, you revisit it and said, well, wait a minute, we're making that decision because people can't remember passwords longer than that. Well, the advent and easy availability of a password manager changes that constraint. Or if you say, well, we do that because Active Directory or Open LDAP or whatever we're using to authenticate people didn't support passwords that were of a certain length or a certain complexity. Well, a new version comes out and they do. If you don't know why you made that decision, you can't make an adjustment to ensure that you're still meeting your security outcomes. And that's where most people and most security teams sort of fall down, is that they're not adjusting to adapt to the current landscape because they don't understand why they had made decisions in the first place. At the point of decision, they understand why, but they lose that record over time. So it's not quite, oh, that's the way we've always done it. It's just simply a sort of a mental assumption that something is done. It's a fait accompli. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And nothing could be further than the truth. Cybersecurity is a rapidly changing, dynamic domain. And in order to keep up, you need to constantly be updating your decisions, your policies, your approach to different things. So here's my concrete recommendation. I don't do that often. I think maybe often enough on Mornings with Mark. So I'm going to give you a concrete recommendation. If you're on a cybersecurity team, or even if you're in a development team, if you're in anything in IT, what's a really good practice is when you make a decision, jot down the notes on your own, in a wiki internally or in a shared note folder somewhere, but jot down the constraints and the environment and the reasoning and the goal behind that decision. So if we go back to our password example and we say, let's put ourselves back 10 years and we go, we're going to provide this type of password guidance. We're going to say at least 8 characters, mixed case, change it every 90 days, because based on current computing rates, that password will take, at least 2 weeks to crack, because our current LDAP provider will only allow us to go up to 16 characters, because based on the latest, systems layout, our users need to remember 18 different passwords. Then you put a timer on that. Every 3 months, go back and revisit it. It'll take you 2 minutes. Have these constraints changed? Well, no, we still have that version of LDAP. No, we, computing power hasn't significantly changed. No, password managers are still not a thing. Okay, come back again 3 months. Hey, wait a minute. Password managers are easily available. We have a site license. Well, now we can start to get a little more complex, right? Great, but we still have these other 2 constraints. LDAP still doesn't support it, blah, blah, blah. That's how you keep those decisions fresh. That's how you keep reevaluating, because you need to record those constraints, the reasoning why, and the goal that you're trying to achieve when you make that decision. If you can do that, you're going to be way further ahead in the game, as opposed to turning around and just going, 4 years later going, well, I don't know, that's why we always told them. I'm sure there was something lost to the sands of time, but that's not effective. What's effective is recording those constraints, recording the desired outcome, and saying, this is the best decision we had based on the existing constraints to reach our desired outcome. If something changes, you should update that guidance. Simple, absolutely simple. Just takes, some calendar reminders, a place to record notes around decisions, and you will be so much further ahead. You might even keep up with some of the younger folks. Have a great day. Hit me up online at MarkNCA, in the comments down below. And as always, for the podcast listeners and everybody else, email me at markn.ca. How do you keep decisions up to date? How do you remember what your goals were, your constraints around the time you made that decision? Do you think this is along the right track? Do you like that solution? Very simply, just recording that all down and putting a timer on it. Do you have something better? Share with a group. We can all get better through this, because we're putting the effort in to make these decisions in the first place. It's on us to make sure that they're always current and up to date. Have a good one.